I hadn't seen Jessica in 10 years, yet the moment I laid eyes on her at the business dinner, it felt as if time had collapsed in on itself. She sat there, lost in thought, her raven black hair shifting slightly to reveal the delicate curve of her neck. Despite the sea of clinking glasses and murmured conversations around her, she seemed untouchable, wrapped in an invisible cocoon of solitude. Jessica had always been striking, but now she carried an undeniable chill about her, like the unmelting snow of a winter that refused to end, cold, distant, unreachable. And yet, when she looked at Alex, I saw something shift in her gaze, something that softened like frost yielding to spring. She didn't notice me at first. When she finally did, her dark eyes flickered with a trace of impatience before she lowered them again, as if dismissing my presence entirely. A friend leaned in, whispering, "That's Jessica. She just came back from abroad and took over her family's business. Oxford grad, brilliant strategist, definitely more than just a spoiled rich kid. And gorgeous, right?" He smirked knowingly. "A lot of guys are after her. Want to go say hi?" I said nothing. Jessica. The name alone was enough to unravel a flood of memories. 17-year-old Jessica, her pale skin almost translucent under the summer sun, her eyes always carrying the shadow of a smile. The way her voice had once held warmth, a melody that could quiet the storm inside me. "Michael, let's go to Oxford together." It was a long-lost echo, a whisper from a past that had nearly faded. But in that moment it came rushing back, clear as day. As if she had just spoken those words yesterday. I set my drink down, my voice barely above a murmur. "No, it's fine. Let's go." But just as I turned away, I felt it, her gaze finally locking onto me. A sharp inhale. A moment of stillness. Then movement. Jessica pushed through the crowd, her heels striking the floor in a hurried rhythm, her pace quickening until she was running. "Michael!" Her voice trembled, thick with something raw. Disbelief, urgency, something unspoken. For a split second, my resolve wavered. But then I turned my back on her and walked away. Jessica and I had what most would call a textbook childhood friendship. Our families were close. We were born in the same hospital and practically raised side by side. But Jessica had always been different. Always carried herself with a quiet kind of arrogance, as if she was meant to stand above everyone else. And in truth, she did. By the time we were in elementary school, love letters filled her desk, the confessions of enamored boys spilling over like an endless tide. She never read them, just tore them up piece by piece right in front of the hopefuls before tossing them in the trash without a second glance. She had every right to be proud, a prestigious family, a face that made heads turn, a mind that worked faster than anyone could keep up with. At 3, she was flipping through the Oxford Dictionary. At 11, she hacked into her father's company firewall just to prove she could. Her father was both furious and impressed. But with me, she had always been different, more restrained, and maybe that was why it had always been so easy to believe we would never be strangers, until we were. Jessica never missed a chance to call me dumb. "If I don't help you, you'll be doomed." That was her favorite line. From elementary school to high school, we were always together, either at my house or hers, studying side by side. She'd tap me on the head with her pen in frustration. "Michael, how many times do I have to explain this? Are you dumb?" Under her relentless tutoring, I should have turned into a genius myself. But no matter how much she scolded, we were always first and second in class, inseparable. Her mother used to joke that we were like siblings. Maybe, one day, we should just get married. Every time she said that, Jessica would blush and stay silent. And though I never said anything either, inside I was overjoyed, because who wouldn't fall for someone like Jessica? She was brilliant, beautiful, untouchable to everyone else, but she had a special kind of affection just for me, Or at least I thought she did. Then Alex appeared. Alex was unlike anyone I had ever met. To put it kindly, he was unconventional. And the worst part? Jessica noticed him. At first, she treated him like any other foolish admirer. When Alex sent her a love letter, she tossed it in the trash without hesitation. But Alex wasn't like the other boys. The second time, he didn't bother with words on paper. He cornered her against the wall, pinning her hands above her head with that signature smirk. Blowing a slow stream of smoke into the air, he murmured, "Jessica, I like you. Let's date." Everyone liked Jessica, but no one had ever pursued her like that. I thought she would push him away, thought she would scoff in that superior way of hers. But instead, for the first time, Jessica hesitated. A flush crept up her neck. Her ears turned red, and before I knew it, Jessica and Alex were together. "He's different," she told me one day, her voice distant. "He's like a beam of light. He makes my world brighter." But my world dimmed. Waiting for Jessica at the school gates became unbearable. Because now, Alex was always there too, his arms slung around her shoulders, grinning at me like he owned her. "Your childhood friend is waiting for you," he'd tease. "Gonna ditch me for homework?" His friends would jeer along. "Yeah, Jessica, go home and study. Michael's waiting for you." I looked at Jessica, silently asking her to say something, to defend me, to laugh it off, and to come with me like she always had. But she only glanced at me briefly before linking her arm through Alex's and walking away. She didn't say a single word. Alex turned back, smirking at me like he knew he had already won, and maybe he had. After that, Jessica stopped coming to the library, stopped helping me with homework, stopped answering my messages. She started skipping school, running off with Alex to God knows where. She traded her textbooks for reckless adventures, hanging out with street thugs, sneaking off in her family's car for joyrides, and doing everything she once would have called foolish. And for the first time, in that year's final exams, I was at the top of the class. Jessica wasn't second. She had fallen so far down the ranks that even the teachers begged her to come back. Her parents were furious, and I just felt hollow. One day, Mrs. Johnson, our teacher, pulled me aside. "Michael, can you find Jessica? Talk to her. Maybe she'll listen to you." I didn't want to. I knew she wouldn't listen. Knew that Jessica, the Jessica I knew, was already gone. But I still went. Because somewhere deep inside, I still saw the girl who once called me dumb and promised we'd go to Oxford together. I found her under the dim glow of streetlights, dressed in a short skirt and fishnet stockings, twirling a cigarette between her fingers like it was a game. She barely glanced at me. "What? Are you here to lecture me too?" I clenched my fists, forcing back the frustration, the pain, the ache of losing her. "Jessica," I whispered. "Didn't we agree to go to Oxford together?" I hesitated, swallowing my pride, my pain, almost begging. "I know you like Alex. I'm not asking you to leave him. Just, can't you wait? At least until we get into Oxford." Jessica scoffed, and then Alex appeared, draping his arm around her, pressing a smug kiss to her cheek as he turned to me with that same mocking grin. "Michael, Jessica is my girlfriend. Who do you think you are to her now? What's your relationship?" The words struck harder than any fist. My face turned pale as I looked at Jessica, searching for something, anything, in her expression. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. Alex smirked, exhaling a slow stream of smoke. "Let's settle this now, so you stop clinging to someone else's girl." He nudged Jessica lightly, his voice full of amusement. "Go on, Jess. Choose." To this day, I can still recall that moment. The way the setting sun burned a deep crimson, the way the wind felt against my skin as I stood there, waiting, my heart pounding in my ears. Jessica's lips curved into a slow, sarcastic smile. Then, without hesitation, she turned to Alex and kissed him, deeply, right in front of me. When she pulled away, She looked into his eyes and whispered something too soft for me to hear. But I didn't need to hear it. I already knew. The ground beneath me felt unsteady as a group of thugs, men with scores to settle against Alex, caught us off guard. I later learned that one of them had a sister, someone Alex had used and discarded. She had fallen for him, had a miscarriage because of him, had begged him to stay, only to be met with a slap from Jessica. That man didn't forget, and he didn't forgive. He and his gang dragged the three of us into a van, beating us relentlessly. Alex got the worst of it, covered in blood, barely conscious. We were dumped in an abandoned warehouse, bound and waiting for their so-called boss. Even after all that, Alex still had the strength to wake up first. He freed himself, and then started untying us. There were 2 doors. Jessica, brilliant as always, used a wire to pick the lock on one of them. Just as we were about to make our escape, the gang heard the noise. The door burst open. Instinctively, I turned to Jessica, and in that split second, she made her choice. She grabbed Alex's hand and ran. My own hand reached out, but it never met hers. My blood ran cold as I watched them slip through the door, Alex shoving it shut behind him, locking me inside. The gang didn't chase them. They turned to me instead. I was Jessica's childhood friend, and now I was the only one left. The blows came harder this time. A stick cracked against my leg, breaking it. My ribs, my arms. I lost count of how many times they hit me. Eventually, the warehouse was set on fire. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with smoke, making it impossible to breathe. My eyes burned so badly I couldn't even cry. But despite the flames surrounding me, despite the searing pain, all I felt was cold. That fire should have killed me, but it didn't. A passerby saw the smoke and called 911. By some miracle, the fire department was nearby and arrived just in time. I spent weeks in the hospital. When I finally woke up, my parents were there, their faces pale with worry. The first thing I said was, "I don't want to be here anymore." Because of my injuries, I could no longer run, play basketball, or ski. Everything I had once loved was taken from me. Jessica's family came to visit, but my parents turned them away. Our families, once so close, broke apart completely. In the end, we left. We immigrated abroad, and I erased everything, my past, my contacts, my name in Jessica's world. For a whole decade, I never saw her again. I was 17 when my youth ended in fire and betrayal. 10 years later, at 27, I returned to China to take over the family business. I thought I had buried my past, thought I had moved on. Then I saw her, Jessica. The moment my eyes landed on her, those 10 years collapsed in an instant. The pain I had long silenced roared back with a force I wasn't prepared for. And I did the only thing I could. I turned away. Jessica. A name that once meant everything to me, the girl who was my brightest light in childhood, and the one who pushed me into hell. To be fair, it wasn't entirely her fault. She had the right to choose Alex. She owed me nothing, but that didn't change the fact that I never wanted to see her again. Yet fate had other plans, because no matter how much you try to avoid someone, life has a way of making sure you cross paths. I didn't expect to see her again. Not in the negotiation conference room. The door had barely swung open when our eyes met. Jessica froze. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then her lips trembled, and she finally whispered, "Michael." I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, but I thought I saw Jessica's eyes redden. A flood of emotions surged through me, raw and overwhelming. I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay composed. Emily must have noticed something off because she leaned in and asked, "Michael, what's wrong?" Her voice jolted me from the storm raging inside. I took a deep breath, forcing steadiness into my words. "It's nothing." Throughout the negotiation, both Jessica and I were distracted. My mind was restless, and all I wanted was to leave the moment it ended. But just as I turned, Jessica grabbed my arm. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice unsteady. "Michael, it was you that day. I've been looking for you for years." Emily glanced at me, sensing my frustration. Then she turned back to Jessica and sneered. "Sorry, Miss Chen, but we have a meeting. If you have something to say, let's save it for another time." She firmly took my hand and led me out. After seeing Jessica again, sleep became impossible. And when I did manage to drift off, the nightmares came, the fire, the suffocating black smoke. Jessica's cold, indifferent eyes as she held Alex's hand and pushed me into hell. I would wake up sweating, my chest heaving, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. One morning, exhausted and restless, I took a day off. I didn't want to stay home, but I had no idea where to go. So I wandered aimlessly. By the time I came to my senses, I was standing outside my old high school, a place filled with memories, both precious and unbearable. I stood there for a while, lost in thought when I heard footsteps behind me. Jessica. I hadn't looked at her closely during our last encounter, but now, after 10 years, I could see how time had changed her. She was taller, her once slender figure now more defined. Her face, adorned with elegant makeup, held a maturity I didn't recognize. Yet, despite the sleek black trench coat, despite the polished exterior, I could still see the 17-year-old girl who used to scold me for being careless while patiently tutoring me. The girl I had once adored. But that girl was long gone. Standing before me now was the person who had abandoned me. I frowned, instinctively stepping back, ready to leave. "Michael," she called out. I froze. There was a long silence before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you an apology. I've been looking for you all these years. I've replayed that day in my mind, regretting leaving you." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. What good is saying this now? It's been 10 years. What's done is done. An apology won't change anything. Jessica forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know saying sorry is pointless, but I want to make it up to you. Can you give me a chance?" "No." Jessica's breath hitched. "I don't want to see you again. Let's remain strangers." Her lips trembled as she repeated my words, her voice cracking with pain. "Strangers?" She took a step forward, looking desperate. "Michael, I know you resent me. I know you hate me. If it helps, you can hit me, scream at me, do whatever you want. But don't tell me that after all the time we spent together, you'd rather be strangers." I clenched my fists, my emotions a tangled mess of fury and sorrow. I forced myself to stay calm, but my voice trembled with the weight of everything I had held back for 10 years. "Jessica, can you stop being so shameless?" She flinched, but I continued. "Just because you regret it, does that mean I have to forgive you? Do you have any idea what I went through? How dare you stand in front of me like this?" Jessica's face twisted in pain, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. To be honest, did I hate her? Once I did, but not overwhelmingly so. She liked Alex. She chose him over me. In her mind, it was justified. But what had I done to deserve what followed? Who was I supposed to blame? Over the years, I had come to terms with it. Maybe it was just my fate. I never expected her apology. I never wanted it. I just wanted to never see her again. Jessica called out as I turned away, her voice breaking with desperation. "Michael, did you really like me back then?" I didn't stop walking. Did I like her? No, I loved her. For years, I waited for her, cared for her, and hoped for her. But love is fragile, and in the face of betrayal, it burns away like paper in a fire. Now, all I feel when I look at her is disgust. Disgust so deep that I never want to see her again. Even though Jessica had chosen me once, I no longer needed to be chosen by her ever again. As I walked past the street corner, a man in a faded jacket suddenly halted, his expression filled with surprise. "Michael?" He removed his sunglasses and smiled. "Do you remember me?" "Alex." At a commercial dinner with Emily, I excused myself to go to the restroom. On my way down the corridor, I heard a familiar voice. Looking over, I saw Alex, wearing an ill-fitting suit, his ankles exposed, embracing Jessica from behind. "I've never forgotten you," he murmured. I glanced at the scar on his profile, a reminder of the life he had spiraled into after betraying me. My powerful friends abroad had orchestrated an attack that nearly cost him his life. He never knew who had ambushed him, only that his luck had run out. He got into more trouble, was expelled, and blacklisted from decent jobs. My contacts ensured he remained in the gutter, sabotaging every opportunity he sought. Desperate, he turned to crime and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. And while inside, his suffering far outweighed what I had endured. Now here he was, hoping to rekindle what he had lost. Jessica remained silent. Alex's eyes reddened. "I know you blame me, but I was scared too. I didn't mean to leave you behind. Jessica, I know you haven't forgotten me." He reached out, touching her softly, as if to remind her of the love she once had for him. But Jessica suddenly pushed him away, her eyes blazing. "Don't ever mention him again!" Her voice was ice, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow, deliberate glance up and down, she sneered. "The biggest regret of my life was saving you." Alex stood frozen as realization dawned. The foolish infatuation of our youth had shattered into a bitter reality. 10 years ago, he was the golden boy, and I was the expendable one. Now, he was nothing but a jobless ex-con, and she was out of his reach. "Jessica, please, get out of my sight, Alex." For the first time in his life, Alex looked afraid. Jessica laughed abruptly, a bitter, mirthless sound. I turned away and lit a cigarette. This city wasn't big. Even among millions of people, fate had a cruel way of making me cross paths with my past. Again and again. I never thought Jessica would completely move on from Alex. She had always been stubborn, someone who refused to let go of what she wanted. I assumed she would cling to Alex forever. But their breakup was just as abrupt as everything else in my life. Back at the dinner, I expected Alex to leave, but instead, he walked over, drink in hand, as if nothing had ever happened. "What a coincidence. Michael," he said with a forced smile. "Been a while. How have you been?" I stared at him for a long moment before turning to leave. If Jessica's choice of Alex had been understandable back then, his choice to shut the door on me would have been the final nail in my coffin. I still didn't know whether he did it, out of revenge or simple cowardice. But I no longer cared. I hated the man standing before me. Alex grabbed my arm, laughing nervously. "Come on, Michael. Why are you acting so high and mighty now? Did you forget how you used to chase after Jessica? You followed her around like a dog, but she only ever wanted me." His mocking laughter grated against my nerves. He wanted to provoke me, to drag me down to his level. I set my drink down, loosened my tie, and without hesitation, punched him. His head snapped to the side, his next insult dying in his throat. Alex clutched his face in shock. "You dare hit me?" The room fell silent, eyes turning to watch the spectacle unfold. Alex tried to make a scene, shouting for security, but no one cared. He looked ridiculous, pathetic. I took the handkerchief Emily handed me, wiped my hand, and tossed it aside. Jessica rushed over, concern etched on her face. "Michael, are you okay?" She checked me over before turning to Alex, her eyes filled with disgust. "Why are you still here making a fool of yourself? Didn't I tell you to leave?" Alex's teeth clenched, his humiliation evident, but I didn't give him the chance to speak. Security, Get him out. Two guards grabbed Alex, dragging him away as he shouted for Jessica. She didn't even spare him a glance. Frustrated, I pushed past Jessica, leaving the banquet hall. The autumn air was crisp, wrapping me in a quiet chill. Emily followed me outside, draping a coat over my shoulders. "Who was that idiot?" she asked. Casually. I exhaled slowly, my breath forming a faint mist. "I asked you before about that J person," she continued. "What did she do to you?" For years I had refused to talk about it. But now, standing in the cold with Emily beside me, I laughed softly but quickly turned serious. "I don't want to hold you back. I'm not ready for a relationship." I had tried before, forcing myself to move on, but I always failed at the last moment. Emily was the only one whose presence didn't feel suffocating, but I was scared. Emily's expression faltered, but she still smiled. "Michael, just don't push me away. That's all I ask." I didn't know how to respond. And then, I laughed softly but quickly turned serious. "I don't want to hold you back. I'm not ready for a relationship." I had tried before, forcing myself to move on, but I always failed at the last moment. Emily was the only one whose presence didn't feel suffocating, but I was scared. Emily's expression faltered, but she still smiled. "Michael, just don't push me away. That's all I ask." I didn't know how to respond. And then, Jessica appeared again. "Michael," she began urgently. "I didn't know Alex would be here. She never got to finish." Emily slapped her. Hard. Jessica staggered back, blood forming at the corner of her lips. Emily rolled up her sleeve, her expression cold. "You still have the nerve to show up?" Jessica wiped her lip and hissed. "This is between Michael and me." Emily snorted, linking her arm with mine. "He's my boyfriend now, so stay the hell away from him." Jessica's eyes widened in disbelief. "Michael, is that true?" Emily smirked. "Face it, Auntie. If Michael had a choice, why on earth would he ever choose you?" Jessica's face turned pale as I spoke calmly, my voice devoid of emotion. "Jessica, I don't care about your college, your past compensation. None of it matters. Just leave." Her face lost all color. She choked up, ignoring the fact that Emily was still standing there. With tears streaming down her face, she stepped forward, her voice trembling. Michael, I regret it. You have no idea how I've been living all these years. Please, I'm begging you, don't do this. Just one more chance. I'll give you anything you want. It took me 10 years to find you, and now that I have, please don't push me away." Emily's eyes widened. "Hey, with my temper, do you want to fight?" I held up a hand, stopping her. Then I turned to Jessica and met her desperate gaze. My voice was steady but firm. "I don't blame you for what happened back then, and you don't need to make amends. But Jessica, I really don't want to see you again. If you truly feel you owe me, then don't ever show up in front of me again." Jessica's body trembled. Despair filled her eyes before she gave a bitter, broken smile. "All right," she whispered. "If that's your wish, I'll agree." At that moment, I never imagined it would be the last time I'd see Jessica. The next time her name appeared before me, it was in the local news. Man kills on street after being released from jail. The victim dies on the spot. Alex Kalin never let go of Jessica. Even after all these years, he pursued her relentlessly. But Jessica had nothing left for him. Only disdain and hatred. She had him beaten up, refusing to be his victim. With nothing left to lose, Alex spiraled into madness. One day, in a blind rage, he ambushed her as she entered her company. He stabbed her over and over, his intent clear. By the time the ambulance arrived, Jessica was already gone. Covered in blood, Alex laughed maniacally in the middle of the street. "Jessica, you think you're special. You're the most pretentious one. You deserve to die." His public murder was caught on surveillance and witnessed by countless bystanders. There was no doubt about his guilt. The court sentenced him to death, immediately. By then, my company had expanded abroad, and Emily and I were preparing to leave the country. But before I left, I visited Jessica's grave. Her tombstone bore a photo of her at 17, young, beautiful, untouched by the weight of time. A hint of a smile lingered on her lips, frozen forever.